Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Pit Therapy Podcast. I'm Kyle and I've got Trevor, and we're joined by a special guest, Christian, from the band Virtue. So thanks for jumping on, man. We really appreciate it. Big fans of you guys. So we're super happy to have you on.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Yeah, I listened to y'all's episode with Soul Exchange. So it was cool to hear even stuff that I hadn't heard before, even though that I know those guys and that they obviously we share guitarists. But yeah, very excited to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah.
Well, they
absolutely.
very quickly said, hey, your next guest needs to be Christian. Like, make sure to grab him. He's got a lot to say. So we're expecting a very full episode.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, to be honest, like I'm definitely in the yap vibes. But I will say I got something to say for sure. Like I can talk.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And you actually do kind of your own little podcast. I don't want to say little as in like,
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about that. Because I mean, people will get that you're kind of comfortable talking on camera. So
Yeah, man. So I do a podcast called the Max Effort Podcast, and it's been sort of a thing that I've done for the last 4 years, but I've kind of picked up and put down a couple times just because out of life changes, and you know how it is. It's like it's habit and routine. I think the good thing about y'all is that you have two people, so it makes it really easy to be like, hey, yo, let's sit down to record this. Whereas like when you're with yourself, it makes it a lot harder to like sit down and do the thing. But yeah, it's basically a podcast that is kind of just for the mental aspect of things, where I can kind of write about my own personal experiences. Somebody put it in a really good way the other day that was kind of wrapping it up to be a kind of like my own personal diary that I talk to other people, or journal, if you will. It's probably a better way to put it rather than diary. But it's just sort of experiences that I've gone through just in my own journey of self-improvement, because in fitness and in the band, in my own career, and there's just there's a long mental game, right? And being inspired, being motivated, being encouraged, being discouraged. It's like those things are always knobs that are going up and down. So I just kind of think to myself, hey, if I can put out, a 10 to 15 minute little episode about a certain topic, that somebody somewhere is going to need to hear that on their drive to work when they're feeling burnt out, or they're feeling like they don't really want to be where they're at, because a lot of us, have either been in a position before or are currently in a position where you work a day job that you aren't happy with. You're wanting to go to the gym, you're wanting to start a routine. You want to make some life changes, and it's just, that stuff is hard, right? There's just nothing but friction. So I think just having some realistic and relatable insight on how to navigate those things, that's kind of the whole idea of the podcast.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're, obviously big advocates for mental health and just improving yourself in general. I think it's important. But do you think that it's harder to be vulnerable like that on a podcast, or is it harder to be vulnerable on a podcast or through your music? Like, do you find one easier, or are they both just kind of like an artistic way for you to express yourself?
So that's a great question, because I learned long ago that when I started my podcast, it felt like sort of the Trinity, because I'm a full-time personal trainer and I do the band, and I felt like the podcast was sort of that third outlet. And I realized that they're all very symbiotic, that they all sort of surround the same thing, but they reach different types of people. In hardcore, it's like, it's very specific to hardcore, right? And in training, I'm working with general population, but I'm working with a lot of different types of people. You sit down, you hear a lot about their life, you learn their life, and a lot of it has to deal with shame and guilt of how they've lived their life. And so with the podcast, I feel like it sort of branches out to all of them. And it can sort of be that gateway for a lot of people to kind of step into, a different way of thinking. But I try to make it relatable to everyone. So when it comes to being vulnerable, there are definitely areas that I think I probably should talk about more, that I think would be more relatable, because I think being somebody who is quote unquote perceived as positive, that's just how people are going to see you, right? They're like, oh, that guy's like so positive all the time. He seems like he's always in a really good mood, or he's just like the positive guy. And while I do think that that is a like compliment, and I do enjoy that, I realize that claiming myself as being positive all the time makes it almost unrelatable, because positivity and being overly positive doesn't really do anything for the person that's struggling. And if they see me as someone who is way up on a mountaintop trying to be like, hey, come on up here and join me, it's not going to be easy. And if I'm in a good mood, if they're going through the hardest period of their life. So I think to open that door, and for people to really believe that, hey, where I'm at is not hopeless. I'm not in a position to where I cannot change. So being able to tell my own personal stories about literally overcoming some of the hardest experiences of my life, it opens that door for that person to be like, okay, I believe that I can do the same thing, because in reality, it's motivation, yes, but it's also, it's opportunity, it's possibility. And like anything, if you hear, bands talk about their success, and if the things that I relate to, if there's a band that I look up to, and if they talk about the hardest experiences of whatever, like issues on tour or playing the worst shows of their life, it's like, dude, I relate to that really hard because I've been through that. So to know that, oh, hey, there is an other side. There is another side. If you keep going, then it's, that's what makes it more relatable. And so, yeah. So to answer your question in a very long way, it is hard to be vulnerable. But I think there's a right way to do it, because that's what's going to help people relate in the way that I feel like I want them to relate,
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And like, I love hearing that. I mean, I have a hard time doing that. I deflect and make jokes about buttholes, and Trevor then gets mad at me. So I'm glad there's people that can actually be real and vulnerable and help, because it's needed, man. And like in the world of social media, it's like everyone tries to make their life look perfect. And the big issue is that it's an unreal expectation, and people crave like authenticity. And so what I've listened from you on the podcast and also your music is, you feel the authenticity, and it's important, because we might not be going through the same things, but when somebody has gone through something and they came out the other side, that's enough motivation, I think, to help people see that they can do it too,
100%.
So.
Yeah. One thing that I will talk about quite a bit is, I feel like what the podcast exists as, and even like with Virtue, but I think more so maybe the podcast, because the podcast is more on the nose, right? Like it is what it is. You just hear me talk and there's a topic. Whereas the music, you may never even know the lyrics ever, but you just love the way the music sounds. But I think that with the podcast, it's going to relate to people at some points, and other people may never even listen to it. But I always like to say, it's like, it might not be for you right now, but at some point it will be, So it's like, hey, if you're not going through that, it may not ring your bell, but there will come a point where, you might go through something and you might say, oh, I remember Christian mentioning something about that, or posting something about that, and then go back and listen to it. That happens to me all the time, where I'll get these random DMs from people I haven't talked to in a long time or ever talked to, and say, hey, like I listened to that episode and really hit. And I was like, wow, that would never expected that from that person, So
yeah.
I'm super stoked to have you here. I really appreciate all that kind of stuff. I listen to a lot of like the Walking Blind podcast with Mike Perez. They do a lot of the mental health stuff as well. And like you said, it's always really interesting to be able to have someone vulnerable who's willing to speak it. And so you especially come in as like a personal trainer and stuff like that. Do you feel like, are you typically an extrovert then, or are you more introverted in your like personal life?
Well, that's a solid question. That one hits, because I will very much be an extrovert in the environment that I thrive in and that I want to be in, but I'm very much an introvert when it comes to everything else. It took me a long time to become more extroverted And I think before I struggled really, really bad with social anxiety, but just going through the experience that I went through to, like in my own like fitness journey, and then working at a gym where it was just me there, like running the gym. And so I kind of had to learn how to survive in all conversations, being able to talk with people, get on vulnerable levels to like be at eye level, deal with uncomfortable situations. And when it comes to just like managing a gym, cause that's what I did before. And that really taught me how to connect with everyone, and so that case, I will thrive in those environments. But if you put me at like an EDM concert or something like that, dude, I will want to like hide in a trash can. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, like it just depends. I think I'm just like, put me in the environment that I want to be in and I'm good. And if I'm somewhere else that I'm like uncomfortable in, dude, I want to like hide. And I would rather just honestly stay inside and just hang out and just watch Sopranos. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what.
Listen, I feel like this is like hardcore in general, because like we sit here and we can talk for hours with like each other, with guests, anything that's related to music. We can always just sit there and talk. But as soon as you put us in an environment that's like outside of our comfort zone, where we're not talking about music, I feel like almost everyone in the hardcore scene is kind of the same way. It's kind of funny that we all congregated and that hardcore is the outlet that kind of helps us all get to that point. And then you have personal training and things along those lines. But being a front man, like obviously you have to have some sort of social interaction, right? Do you feel like that is something that you wanted to explore when you decided to like become a front man and stuff like that? Or is it something that just you had to do?
So I was initially a guitar player. That's where like I spent the majority of my time. I was just writing guitar and became a pretty good guitarist. And it was in one of my old bands from way 10, 11 years ago, where the vocalist we had at the time just decided to back out like 2 days before a show. And so I ended up just taking over and doing vocals then. And like, since then I just stuck with it. I was like, I can actually do this pretty well. And I feel like pretty good about it. And honestly, I was the one that wrote the lyrics for the most part, and kind of heard like when I would write guitar, I would write the vocals in my head already. And I would have an idea what I want the song to be about. So I think that just became more natural, just as overall, rather than being a vocalist or a guitarist, it was just like a songwriter. And I think with like since then, it's sort of just been finding my own voice as a vocalist and my own voice as a front man, because I think there's two different things. There's two different like identities that you have to embody. And I feel now maybe I'm finding that a little bit more, just because I feel like I'm becoming sort of my own person. And with Virtue, it's been kind of this interesting experiment, I guess, because, I look at like what would I want to see, like from a frontman perspective, like what would I want to hear? And it's like, okay, how can I embody like these lyrics? And then, even with the stage presence element or whatever, like I'm not super great on stage, to be honest. Like I think I'll be real upfront that I get really, really nervous before shows, like very nervous, to where I just get really bad butterflies. And I'm like somebody who just walks around in circles until it's time to play. Even when I stand up on there, I'm like, my knees are buckling because I'm so nervous. But I think to myself, okay, what the music embodies, what the lyrics are, it's very, if you actually read them, they're like hype tracks in a way, right? Like it is about me kind of going about the ups and downs of whatever process or whatever journey I'm going through, or what the song's written about. But it is like a hype track at the end of the day, right? Like I always end a song with something that's just like, that packs kind of a punch. And so I have to remember that. And when I think about that, I have to tell myself it's time to turn it up to 11. Like where I feel a lack of confidence, I need to turn that all the way up, like the volume past, break the knob off essentially, because that's the only way that I feel like I can overcome that nervousness. And And I think that maybe answers your question, maybe a little bit. I think I went too far
Yeah.
off in one direction. Okay. Yeah.
No, no, you're good. You're good, man.
Cool.
So, no, I really appreciate all that. So let's talk about
Yeah.
Virtue. You guys started
Okay.
2018, 2019. When did the band officially start?
So it started in, I think, the tail end of 2017. It was Bryce and,
Oh, okay.
yeah, he was in Soul Exchange, and then myself, and then Mikey, our drummer. Mikey's an actor, and he's also like a writer, director stuff. So he's like really busy with that, especially nowadays. But at the time, the reason Mikey and I connected is because we were actually writing a short film together. Like I had written a script or like a rough outline of a script for a short film. And Mikey was an actor. So I was like, hey, let's get together. Let's chat about this. And then he also was like, he's been a musician in Austin for a long time. And so we ended up meeting up together. And then we decided, I had pitched it. I was like, dude, I kind of want to do something heavy. Bryce and I were doing a melodic hardcore band called Relief before Virtue, and then we had like a little bit of a gap, and he was playing with Insurgents. But I was like, man, I've always sort of lended myself way more to just like kind of the heavier side of things, just more moshy. And I was like, I want to go that direction. So I think the three of us got together. I was still writing for Virtue at the time, and it had been a long time since I picked up a guitar. So I kind of listened to a bunch of inspirational bands for me at the time and just sort of wrote what I felt like I could bring to the table, and then sent it to Bryce, and then we kind of riffed back and forth with each other. And then once I think we had another two guys come in, a bassist that we had for like maybe like a week, and then another guitarist, Fred Tyler. And then we just kind of started from there. We released our first single back in, I think it was the tail end, or it was 2018. I think it was 2018. But
Okay.
so roughly like tail end of 2017, didn't come like fully formed until 2018. So I've been doing it for a minute.
Gotcha. So as you were starting Virtue, who were some of those initial influences?
Man, so I felt I had been, that's a good question. I need to think about that because I'm trying to think about who I was listening to at the time. I remember specifically listening to 2x4. I don't know if you guys know who 2x4 is. So I think one of their EPs or albums, I had like listened to that a little bit because that was kind of like the vibe. Maybe like a little bit of oh, dude, I'm blanking because I remember I was still working a day job at that time, and I remember like giving myself an assignment to like listen to a bunch of the bands. Honestly, my goal was to be kind of like aggressive, and so there was like some Kubla Khan influence at the time. Like I said, with 2x4, and I think Varials. Like I had kind of listened to Varials at the time. They were like kind of like more. I don't even know what you would consider it now. Maybe like not even. I don't know what genre they would be considered at that time, but and then Advent. I don't know if you guys heard Advent before. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So like Advent was like one of the first hardcore bands I've ever heard, and I remember specifically wanting to sound like that fast-paced, like aggressive sort of sound. And so kind of a collection of all those stuff, you know. I also am one of those people where I don't want to write, like I don't want to listen too much because I think the more that I absorb, the more that I can't find my own voice in it. So my goal with really only listening to those to understand how they write riffs rather than gaining inspiration, because I hadn't played guitar in a long time. So I was like, okay, how does like one write riffs now, and how to structure that type of thing? Because it was like, all right, I kind of want to sort of beat downy with like a little bit of hardcore fast influence, and then just be like breakdown after breakdown. Like that was kind of really my own mindset, was just like, I just want to write things that people can lift weights and mosh to. So that was kind of it.
Nice. You wanted the gym music.
That's it. Literally. I remember specifically saying, I want to write like music that my friends can lift to. Like that was like my biggest inspiration when we started. That was it.
Sick.
Yeah.
It's cool that you say Advent, because now that you say that, like I really can hear the influence of that, you know. But
Yeah.
you guys do a really cool thing that's like, I don't know, like it's obviously it's more on the beatdown side, but like even your new EP, like My Mind at Ease, like the intro to that's pretty deathcore-y.
Yeah. That's, Bryce, he's the guy, like 100%. He's the dude that he's just a songwriting machine, like he wrote when we were doing melodic hardcore, counterparts level style stuff with like really beautiful riffs, kind of techie leads and stuff. Like he could do that with the drop of the hat. Like if you went back and listened to his category of like songs that he's written, it's on a whole other level. Like the dude is just like a savant in a way about like writing any kind of genre he puts his mind to. And so with Virtue, he's definitely, he understands our style, like specifically as Virtue, better than I think any of us in the band do. Better than me, because I try to figure out how to describe it the best way, but he can wrap that up and kind of make it its own thing. Because our identity, I think, is we just want to write things that we all enjoy.
Yeah.
And rather than picking like one specific genre, it's just, man, like if we like death metal like breakdowns or death metal type riffs, or if we want to do like hardcore like beatdown type stuff, Mikey and I definitely land more like in the beatdown slam kind of stuff, but we're like, whereas Bryce is really riffy, so it's like, how can we kind of all meet in the same room and then create something from that? So he'll generally write the riffs, he'll write like a whole song and then send it over, and then we kind of listen to it and give whatever feedback and then take it back. And so yeah, he's really, really good about that.
It's like the Saturday Night Live where it's like more cowbell, but you're just like, dude, more breakdowns.
100%. Like, it's like I try to be too, he kind of is like, all right, like beatdown can kind of be too boring, and not to throw him under the bus, but I don't think he would run from that. But and I get that for sure, because you can only do so many variations of that, and but it's just going to hit every time. So I think with like his songwriting structure, it's definitely more of a song. Like it's going to take you from start to finish in a lot of different paths, and they all kind of ring out where they can kind of be one part in like a hardcore kind of riff or whatever, and then kind of be like kind of death metal-y. And so yeah, I mean it's kind of crazy how he does it.
It's kind of funny you say that, because me and Trevor have said before, like, we like beatdown, all right? Like, we're not going to deny any of that. We like beatdown, but we always make the joke that like can be too much beatdown, or that like we make the joke about like having our one beatdown band. Mm-hmm. And like I told him, I was like, dude, I've got Virtue, because like it's beatdown, but it's also creative, right? Because I've listened to a lot of beatdown where I'm just like one time through is cool. Seeing it live's probably a blast.
That's probably the way it's going to
be. But you guys, like, it's a really fun sound, because it's more like, it is beatdown, but it's also more than just beatdown. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, like, Texas is not really known for beatdown. So like, has that been received well? Is it something that people in Texas are like, there's not enough riffs because we're metalheads from, grew up on Pantera and stuff. Do you get that? Or is it like well received here?
So I would say honestly right now that the scale is tipping quite a bit, because I think there are a lot more beatdown bands in Texas as of now, because San Antonio has like a lot of beatdown type bands, right? So there's a band, Fear of Loss, and they're like good friends of ours. And they're obviously like, they're all going to fall under like the hardcore spectrum, most likely. I think that's probably how everybody would kind of classify themselves. But yeah, like I think a lot more bands coming out of Texas that are going to be more in the beatdown space. And I think maybe that whole like Texas metal riffage, I think, is slowly fading out. And I think that beatdown element is starting to take its like
its hold here.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because I just saw Visions of Mortality.
Yeah.
I think you guys played with them, right? I think the vocalist one,
Yep.
So they're kind of in the same vein. They're maybe not as beatdowny as you guys are. but he was saying that like, they're, how it's a little more riffy, their
Mhm.
stuff. He's like, it's kind of a sound that's being lost on this younger generation. So
Yeah, I think with bands that are coming out right now, it's like the beatdown is becoming really popular and like slam and stuff. And I think because those bands are becoming more in like the limelight, whereas they always sort of felt like they were like in this corner space, but now they're like coming to the front door, that a lot of bands are probably, it's like the new norm,
yeah,
right? Like the new norm. Like, um, to be honest, I've never really listened to Tsunami, but I recognize like who they are. And so you have a band that's as big as Tsunami, and then you have like people who like they're new to hardcore, they're new to beatdown or whatever, and they're listening to that like, dude, that is so sick. So now they're the
yeah,
inspiration for a ton of new young bands that are coming out. So, I think it's kind of, I think people just want to mosh, and I think beatdown is what's going to bring you mosh. That's the whole song's, that's all it is. So
yeah,
I think because you see all these videos of like 200 kids at a local show just like spin kicking each other, that's like, that's what's going to drive them out. Is because I remember when I was younger, it was like I just want to mosh. And so that's what's going to bring the mosh now, right? So I think that's
yeah.
kind of where we're at.
So what did you grow up on then? Because we grew up on a lot of the MySpace era, the metalcore, the easy core stuff, a day to remember stuff along those lines. Like you said, we just wanted to mosh. So you could have a post-hardcore band with a breakdown, and we were throwing to the breakdown. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and today you look kind of silly going to Thursday shows and throwing down. You know what I mean? So like, what did you grow up on? And what were some of those like early bands that you listened to?
So it's going to be a little bit of a journey, but I grew up, my dad was a pastor of a church. So I grew up in church my whole life up until I was about 20 years old. And when I was younger, we would do shows at our church. He would throw and like promote shows, but it was like alternative Christian, like hard music, but it wasn't, not really hardcore, probably more new metal style at that time. I was like 8. So for me, I just heard it and was like, all right, like I wasn't really like in it as much, but so that kind of was like a big thing where my dad would talk about these heavy bands that he would have come out and play at the church. And then of course they'd be packed because it was like edgy, it was like Christian edgy rock music, but they were like Christian bands. And so that to me kind of put heavy music on my radar. And then it wasn't until way later that I fall into, I remember my sister would listen to a lot of stuff like that, a lot of Tooth and Nail, like basically the whole like Tooth and Nail catalog, and then Face Down, but primarily Tooth and Nail. So at that time, it was sort of like progressing, becoming bands like Project 86. I don't know if you guys like,
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah. So Project 86, and then it was like leading into like Under Oath, and then kind of became about like As They Lay Dying, like OG As They Lay Dying, and then from there I got into kind of like again sort of like because back in that time frame, which is by like 2008. I would say it was like the Christian bands were like the bands, right?
Yeah.
Or like the, quote unquote Christian
100%.
bands. So it was like My Children, My Bride was like an identity for me at the time, because I was like, dude, they just play 2-step riffs and it's just breakdowns that last for like a minute in between snare hits.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So for me, that was like everything I ever needed. So for a long time, it was just My Children, My Bride, August Burns Red, As I Lay Dying. And then that's kind of where I just sort of occupied for a long time. And then it wasn't until I started getting into deathcore. And there was one guy, like there usually is, like the one dude that is your gateway into heavier music. And he had like moved and started coming to our church, and he had like massive, like, 2-inch plugs. So it was already like, oh, he's the man. You know what I'm saying? Because at the time I was like, he was like embodying everything that like was the coolest thing, right?
Yeah.
And he used to skate, and I kind of used to skate a little bit too. And then we were skating one day, and then he puts on Impending Doom, and it was Nail Dead Risen. And I was like, whoa, like my whole life checks out. Like my whole life, I was like, I'm just searching for, in that time frame, I'm just searching for heavy, like I just wanted, I was like, man, it's just not heavy enough. Like I never really went through a scene phase. Like I never got into like, not really so much of like Devil Wears Prada or stuff like that. Cause I just was like, dude, I just want like that brocore level, like where you wear like basketball jerseys. And that's like what you do. You know what I'm saying? Like basketball jerseys and Nike Dunks and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so when he showed me that, I was like, yo, this is kind of life changing. And then he had like introduced me to Emir and then On Broken Wings. And so like all those bands, and I was like, dude, this is the key. And Waking the Cadaver. And so I was like, yeah, so I just went back and like that's where I kind of like fell in like truly in love, was just like that stuff. So at the time, yeah, again, it was like more that deathcore era. I guess you could call it MySpace deathcore, or like brocore, which was just like hardcore influenced, but it's it's just like fat two steps and then just like breakdowns. Like that's literally all I wanted.
That is the true deathcore, and it's the best deathcore kind of thing. Today's deathcore doesn't stack up. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's way different. We had conversations about that before where we were like, man, it's weird how deathcore's having like the deathcore revival, but there's like modern deathcore bands right now. Whereas like at a deathcore show, there might be like 22 people there, depending on like the level of deathcore it is. But like, it's just really interesting how people will really mess with like OG, like the MySpace kind of revival, but like not go to a regular like deathcore show. Like they're not going to go see some modern band right now, but they're going to go to, Girl of Glass or something like that and just like mosh and stuff. So, which I don't blame them. I would be there right there with them. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. None of this Lorna Shore stuff. Like, get rid of that. That stuff's crap. Like, give us the old school, hardcore influence, heavy breakdowns. Like, give us that stuff. That's what we want.
Dude, the 808s, like, give me that, like, all day long. Like, if it were up to me, we would have 808s that sound exactly like that. We do use an 808s like in our live set. But, if it were up to Mikey, the drummer, and I, we would definitely have those, like, just where it's going to shatter the speakers. I'm all about that.
So I went to this, like, toy drive festival thing up here in Dallas this weekend, and I brought my brother-in-law who's, like, never been to a, like, hardcore show. And there's a local band in Dallas called Six Shots in Dallas. It's, like, old school deathcore. And I was never really into it and stuff, but I sat there watching them and I'm like, man, I feel real weird right now. This is a blast from the past. I feel like, I should have been in a basketball jersey with, some Vans on or something, spin kicking people on the edge of the pit, Yeah,
dude, they're amazing and they do it very well. And they're also like 17 years old.
Yeah, they're super young. So it's cool that like, I was texting Trevor. I'm like, man, I don't like deathcore, but like, I respect the crap out of these kids because this is how you do it, 100%.
So they get it to a T. And they really really tight live as well. We played with them a couple months ago, and I was like kind of left with my mouth open. I'm like, man, that's wild. It's really cool to see.
Yeah.
Especially for how young they are. Because it's like, man, when I was that age, I was playing something similar, but it sounded 10 times worse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they covered a Suicide Silence song, and I'm like, they did it justice. You know, sure. Not a lot, especially 17-year-old. Like they're not going to do that right, but they did. So
yeah, absolutely, man. I think that band will do things for sure.
Yeah. So, let's talk about your EP. So it dropped. When was it? Let's see, November 15th, my birthday. Yeah.
Nice, man. There you go. Happy birthday.
It was a good birthday gift.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So it's been a year since your last EP, right? Mm-hmm. So what brought about this one? How's it been received? How you feeling about it now that it's out?
I feel really good that this one is out because it was for sure a return to the joy of creativity for me. in particular. When we dropped Concrete Way of Life, I had been kind of in the smack dab of like a hurricane of life. And that hurricane sort of like brought me down to my knees of just questioning where I'm at. I was like really trying to get just with like work and all kinds of different components that were just sort of making me, like I said, get down on my knees. And I'm like, man, where am I at? And I felt like I was really burnt out because I just was working a lot and just kind of trying to grind in that department, especially like in the training aspect. And Concrete Way of Life was very much I just have to get it done because like they want to do the record. And I was feeling kind of like a loss of like joy surrounding the band because I had been so burnt out that I felt that the band was just an added responsibility that was like a gun pointing at me, where it's like, you got to get this done. And so, there was a part where I was like, man, do I really want to do this anymore? Do I really want to be a part of like, is this where I finally like bow out of music in general and just say like, hey, this was my run. And then now I just retire because, whatever season of life I was going through was kind of communicating that to me. And so I had been writing that just to like, okay, I'm going to finish this. Like in between client sessions at like 7 a.m. I'm just like in my office, just sitting there writing lyrics. And so it just felt like this thing that was sort of like a fever that I had to sweat out. And I'm really, really proud of it. And I think it captures that moment of my life really well. So when it came to Committed to Steel, it was like I was coming at it with a fresh set of eyes where I sort of had this come to Jesus moment earlier this year that was like, hey, everything in your life that you set out to do, you're doing. And it's been a part of you for as long as you can remember. That music has been an outlet of creativity where you get to express so much of your life. So why would you ever walk away from it? Why would you ever second guess it? Why would you ever doubt it? So for me, I had this vision of like a renewed mindset in terms of how I see the band and what I think the band exists as for me, rather than what I feel like my responsibility is to the guys and to even playing shows, but really what it actually means to me. So to be able to sit down and write was a really powerful experience because, my training schedule is pretty, it's pretty like set, but it's also kind of sporadic where, I wake up early in the morning, go train a couple clients and come home for a couple hours and go back. And with that downtime of the couple hours, it was just coming in here in my office, sitting down and just locking in and then writing and realizing that, oh man, not only does this stuff really pull out what's actually like what I'm actually thinking about what's going on in my life, but it was like revving an engine that hasn't been revved in a long time, which is like the fruitfulness of creativity, the fulfillment of creativity, and feeling that kind of come to fruition just by sitting down to do it. And then I'm realizing that, man, maybe like I had to stop and ask myself, like, I think I'm actually falling in love with this again. And so it became a very, very new experience where I was like, man, I could sit down. I have a vision for what I want to convey, for what I want it to sound like, for what I want to hear. And yeah, so to me, it's one of my favorite things that we've ever done because I feel like it's the truest version of myself. It's the truest version of what I've always tried to convey about, in the lyrics and just myself, about kind of returning to that love of creativity that even when your life is, demanding so much from you in other directions that you feel like you're pulled and you can't really, like figure out or see 3 feet in front of you because all you can see is your anxiety or your worry or your fear of the next day or whatever it is. But to me, it was this thing that perfectly captured like a standstill moment in time where I can be like, wow, I just found something that has been a part of me for so long, but I like uncovered it, So that being said, yeah, I'm really happy with it. I think it's been received really well. I think today's day and age is really different about how music operates. I think you I think you have a window of opportunity, and the window shrinks um, until the next big release comes, until the next band releases their, and so right now it's like how good can you be, and when you release something, it's how good can you be for long enough, because it's like you're going to release something, people are going to be fired up on it, and then in a month they're going to be listening to the next best thing that of their other favorite band, and so it's like if you know that you can remain on people's radar, like that's how like, hey, you're there. And even if you're not, it's like that should never be a thing where you think, oh, what did I not do something right? It's just the way the world moves. So to me, I'm really, really proud of it, and it feels like even if it wasn't received well, or even if it wasn't something that people, you know, even took the time to listen to or whatever, it's like I know what it exists as for me, so I can walk in my own sort of personal victory for it. Yeah.
So, what is your process in writing lyrics? Do you like word vomit and just like throw a ton of things down on paper and then start to formulate an idea? Or do you come with like a topic you've been thinking about and just start building around that topic? What's the best way for you to come up with your lyrics?
So I used to write the song first. And in Relief, our hardcore band or melodic hardcore band, it was very poetic. It's like I want to write this thing that's sort of metaphorical in a way where it's beautiful and whatever kind of matches like the melodic tone. With Virtue, it's very different because now I look at vocals as being the fifth instrument. Because when I listen to the songs, I essentially get the demo from Bryce and then I play it legitimately 2,000 times. And then in that process, I hear the vocal patterns first, and then I write to the vocal patterns, but I'll hear the rhythms first. And then I have to figure out how to match whatever I'm trying to say to that. So I generally will just listen 10,000 times so I can gain what the song means to me. And when I do that, I just listen, and it kind of gets tiresome because you're just sitting there listening to the same parts over and over and over again. But my process now is I generally will sit and write as I listen to the song. So just hit play. I'll think of it in chunks. So if it's like the intro part, I'll be like, what do I hear right there? Or a lot of the times I'll hear vocals at the very end part and I'll write backwards. So for example, our song Weight of Life, I'm pretty sure I heard the ending first and how I wanted to like structure the vocals and then just wrote backwards in a way. So it kind of is different, but I think just listening to the song, figuring out what is the song telling me and what is my instrument and how does my instrument fit in that song perfectly. And then when it comes to the actual like writing component, I'm very much writing what's in front of me. So that's sort of where I'm at. And depending on what the song I feel tells me and what I gain from it kind of depends on what I want to write about. But a lot of the time it's just, I don't know, it kind of comes to me in waves. It's really, really interesting, man. It's way different than it's ever been. But just sitting down and facing a blank page and just like saying like, okay, what do I hear?
It's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who did the album art? Because I love it. I'm a huge thrash metal fan, and I love all the like. I don't know. I just love the aesthetic of like of that. So
yeah, it's let me see. We actually talked about that today. So it's really interesting because that wasn't the original art. That was actually a very late decision, and the original artwork was very similar. It was like something that I put together on in an app, like a Photoshop type app, where I was like, man, what if we did like some lightning striking with a knight? And because like we knew Committed to Steel was going to be the thing. And I was like, what if we kind of go above and beyond? And the idea was to just expand on that idea and then reach out to an artist and try to work up a commission for it. But we ended up running out of time because it's like we were already getting ready to go on a little run with Beyond Reach and Apprehend. And we were kind of if you don't strike while the iron is hot, and while, one or two people have that like motivation to want to actually sit down to like message a person and figure out what the cost is going to be if they're able to do it. So we ended up just like been sitting on it. And then I had an idea that, we had shot a promotional video for it. You may have seen like on our Instagram, we're like in a studio shot, like backdrop, like a white backdrop with all of us. That was initially going to be the album art. Because I was like, man, I think it'll be cool if we just kind of like post up and do something slightly different than I feel like what fits for how we sound and just in general as the genre. And we had worked up tons and tons of mock-ups of trying to fit the logo on it and trying to fit, the title Committed to Steel, and it just wasn't clicking. And Bryce ended up finding the Night, and it's from a dude named Primitive Works. So yeah, I wasn't too sure of it, but yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's perfect because it literally was like the first idea, which was just like a night,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's so sick.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, there's nothing cooler than just a knight with a sword in his hand about to fight skeletons. Like that's goated.
It is. It's perfect.
Yeah. Definitely.
So,
yeah.
Cool. So what's next then for you guys? I mean, obviously I know you just released the EP, but, like any tours? I know it's kind of the holidays, so obviously not doing much there.
Yeah.
But...
So we actually had something that was going to be potentially in the works for January, but didn't end up working out. So right now, the decision-making process it's just a little bit more of a strategy right now. Because I think for a lot of us, it's wanting to take it more serious. And I'm not to say that we hadn't done that before, but a lot of us really didn't want to be on the road as much. I know for me, like I wasn't really trying to be a touring guy. And to be honest, like 6 or 7 days, like 8 days out of the week is probably good for me. Like I'd probably go 10 days maybe, you know what I'm saying? But anything after that is hard. And especially with our drummer, Mikey, and his acting schedule and all the stuff that he's working on, it does make it a little harder to fit into that, to like to schedule things out. But the goal is to definitely get on the road more in 2025. We want to hit a couple of places like out west, and then potentially do some more Midwest stuff because we've done really well out there before. But yeah, that's kind of the key, man. Is just be a little bit more strategic. Like we're all older now, and because our lives are busy, and I think we want to make them count, and I definitely think there's value in getting reps and just doing and doing and doing. But I also believe that there's a way to set it up and do it that maybe, you might have to, hey, let's like cut out a lot of the other friction that we might have to go through and just be a little bit more strategic. So I think the goal is just to kind of get on the road a lot more.
Good. Cool.
In an appropriate way.
Yeah. So I hope that means another Dallas date. Like stupid me only found out about you guys. So I'm originally from Salt Lake City. That's where Trevor's located.
Yeah.
I'm recently moved to Dallas, so I'm like just barely learning about everything down here. So
gotcha.
When I found Soul Exchange, then we talked to them and they're like, hey, you should talk to Virtue. It was like, oh yeah, I haven't like really listened to him that much. And then, finally found you guys. By that time you'd already played up here and I missed it. So
dude, I love Dallas so much. I think it's one of the best scenes in Texas, and
cool.
We love playing out there. So anytime we get asked to play a show, it's an immediate yes, because we always have a lot of friends out there, but the scene is just so good and it's just thriving in such a great way that any chance to be a part of it.
Cool. I know that. So Trevor dropped, his internet sucks.
Yeah,
I don't know what he's doing. He's hamster on a wheel.
Gotcha.
But I know he's going to tell you like head out to Salt Lake. So
yeah,
there's a really cool thriving scene out there if you haven't been out that way yet. But I will do him a favor and say that.
Yeah, no, I'd definitely be down. I think we would all definitely be down to get out there. I mean, I'm pretty, maybe not as much, but I was very under traveled because I've just lived in Texas my whole life, and Texas is so big that
Yeah.
when you want a vacation, you use vacation in Texas. And so for me, I just had never really gone to many places, but the first couple runs that we've done have like obviously changed that. But yeah, man, I mean, there's so much of the country that I haven't seen before that, to me, honestly, the value of just like getting to pack up with your best friends, and then you're in another city, and then you realize like, oh wow, we're actually here because we like worked on music, and we get to play music tonight, and a whole nother, it's a crazy feeling. But yeah, I just love going to other cities and just kind of exploring. Like I'm super simple, man. So any place, I'm like, I can get fired up about it because it's not that, like, it's just different, being able to see difference is good.
Well, that's sick, man. That's sick.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, thank you for jumping on. We'll, if you want to, I guess, throw out your socials, we'll make sure to include them and stuff. But if you want to shout out like your podcast and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, man. So like I mentioned before, podcast is the Max Effort Podcast. You can listen to it on Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. Again, it's probably 10 to 12 minutes most of the time of me just sort of giving some insight about a certain topic. And, it's there if you ever need it. My Instagram is xlifecoachx, which is sort of a bit, but kind of crazy because I kind of do that now also with on top of like training, which is like life coaching type things.
Yeah.
Less of like a corny attachment, but more so just like, man, just being in your back pocket and being somebody who's going to be there for you. And then obviously Virtue, you can find it everywhere. Listen to it. Committed to Steel. It's 512 Virtue Instagram. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it as far as plugs.
Cool. Well, seriously, man, we appreciate you jumping on.
Absolutely.
I mean, seems like you guys have a real cool scene down there. You guys have been super nice to us, so we appreciate that. Yeah, if you make your way up here, I will be front and center, spin kicking people for you guys. So, because
I love it.
Big fans of the music and big fans of you guys too. So
I appreciate that, man. I will. I'll have a shirt for you waiting. I'll hook you up with some merch.
Well, I will gladly buy it because I know that's how you guys got to make some money off it. So I will gladly buy it.
Hey, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, anytime. Cool. Well, thanks, man. And yeah, we will see you around.